Thanks very much for joining us for episode 20 of InTek Freight and Logistics, the podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my co-host for this edition, InTek CEO Rick Legore. On this episode, we're talking cybersecurity. What does that have to do with freight and logistics? Let's find out. October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, making it a good time for businesses as well as individuals to take stock of their online behavior and the safety of their digital footprint. To go over why cybersecurity is important both in general and in freight and logistics, and offer up a few tips to enhance your protection, we welcome Jeremiah Vanderneut, Senior Solutions Engineer with the network security company SonicWall. Jeremiah, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
So first off, tell us a little bit about SonicWall and its role in the cybersecurity space, as well as what you do with SonicWall.
Sure. So SonicWall is I call it an end-to-end cybersecurity company. So we provide products and services to really whoever needs them to kind of protect your cyber presence in the world. So we provide hardware appliances from firewalls to remote access appliances, switching, secure access points. We're also present in cloud and virtual environments. So with a lot of businesses migrating to cloud, Amazon Web Services, Azure, Office 365 environments, we have solutions for those as well. So the SonicWall slogan is we provide boundless cybersecurity. And we kind of dig into what that means. But cybersecurity is everywhere now. It's ever present. It's no longer just you're protecting one single office building. People are everywhere. So we have to cover that end to end. And SonicWall has solutions for each of those kind of threat vectors. At SonicWall, I'm a senior solutions engineer. So I'm paired up with a couple of account managers. I cover the New England states and upstate New York. And my job is to provide technical advisement to the account managers when we're talking to customers and partners to, kind of work through the kind of deep dive technical details of a sale. So that's my role.
Great. So before we go further, the boundless thing that you mentioned for SonicWall, especially these days, as you said, people are everywhere doing everything. There's a lot more remote work. There's people spread all over the country, all over the world, at home, in the office, whatnot. So how does that really speak to the environment that's out there today?
Right. So if you think back, not even 10, years ago, your cybersecurity, I call it the threat surface, the points that a malicious actor can attack from a cyber perspective was basically your internet connection to your office, right? So as long as you could protect that, which is relatively simple, then you had a somewhat secure environment. But now, especially with after the pandemic, with the proliferation of remote work, now you've got people at their homes on unsecure wireless networks. They're working out of coffee shops, and even in SonicWall, we have salespeople on the road working out of who knows where. Yeah, you have people everywhere. Even in a logistics perspective, you think about like the Amazon drivers, they each have a device, right? They have pads, they have trackers in their trucks. Those are all points of attack that a malicious actor could use to gain entrance into a network. So that's one way we say boundless. It's no longer, you're not just protecting one line of defense in an office. It's literally you're having to protect your delivery truck, right? Because that is a potential ingress point for a threat actor.
Doesn't sound quite as fun out there, I guess, or as simple as it used to be. So as we are in October, and October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, it's a time to really highlight a little bit more of the threats that are out there. So what would you say are a few of the worst threats facing businesses right now?
Right. So really in the cybersecurity realm, we have call it the cybersecurity triad, which is the acronym is CIA: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So what we're trying to protect with cybersecurity products is confidentiality. So stuff you don't want read, we want to keep that secret. Integrity is if I receive something from another vendor or from a customer, I want to make sure that what I received is not changed in transit. And then availability, meaning I want it to be available, of course. So I could, of course, lock down a network that has no access, which would have perfect security, but then is unusable, which means I have no availability. So that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about kind of threats to businesses. One of the biggest ones of those is ransomware. That's going to attack your availability, right? That's going to prevent you from using your own resources until you pay a ransom to the ransomware holder. And as of right now, there's really no way out of it except to pay for it. So I'm sure everyone's heard about ransomware. Another thing is the proliferation of IoT devices. So like I said, with like the delivery truck drivers, I've dealt with some larger logistics customers who have warehouses, and the warehouses have internet-enabled scanners and internet-enabled inventory systems. And each and every one of those devices is, subject to a cybersecurity attack. An interesting example I saw recently in the news is a casino was recently hacked via a wireless fish tank thermometer. And they used the fish tank thermometer to then move across the network and gain access to the database of high rollers. So now you have millionaires and billionaires information that's been hacked via a fish tank thermometer, right? So the more IoT devices we get in the environments, the larger your threat surface gets, right? Remote workforce is another big one. So obviously a lot of people are working from home now, at least sometimes, or in my case, I'm 100% work from home. And again, people who work from home are just kind of by nature going to be less protected because you're not behind a comprehensive business security solution. Typically, you're kind of on your own, on your home Wi-Fi or on the road. You're just not as protected. And SonicWall and a lot of other vendors do offer products to really protect you in those environments. So certainly something to consider if you have remote workforce is to ask your local, provider what they could offer you for that. And then I would say the last two biggest threats are really people. Kind of the biggest threat is what we call the insider threat, because you can have the most perfect security in the world with the best solution. But if you have a person inside your organization clicks on that link, that's the ransomware link, then that's it, right? You've got ransomware. So, education is important for your employees to make sure they're not clicking on things they don't recognize. And last but not least, another people threat, I would say, are underqualified admins. I do see a lot of times admins who are just kind of over their skis in terms of what they're capable of providing in an organization. And they might have like some basic level certifications, but it's one of those things you don't know that you don't know, right? So you might come out of college with a 4-year cybersecurity degree, but you're really just getting your feet wet, right? So it's really important to, make sure your employees are well trained and well aware of cybersecurity threats, and also make sure that you have admins with a lot of experience that can administer your environment.
Yeah, the people threat is interesting. In both of those examples, you're not talking about malicious behavior from people. You're talking about ignorance or unwitting threat, basically.
Right. So it's kind of, 6 of one, half dozen the other. An example is the town I grew up in, they had a large construction project they were undergoing recently, I think 1 or 2 years ago. And one of the people in the town office got an email from the air quotes construction company that said, our bank information has changed. Please wire the next $2.5 million payment to this bank information. And that person just did, right? Mm-hmm. They just sent it. And that money was immediately converted to Bitcoin and disappeared into the internet, right? So like you could have all the firewalls in the world, but if your employee sends the money, that's it, right? It's gone. So, that's why, employee education is a really big issue because, again, you're inside the wall as an employee. And if you poke a hole in the wall, then that's it. That's you've breached the system.
The other one, just to circle back a little bit on the IoT devices, people, and this is something that's an issue at homes, an issue at any building, you mentioned in the vehicles as well. People don't really think about those extra areas of threat. And a lot of times those IoT devices are not really heavily secured, certainly out of the box, right?
Right. Correct. Yeah. Like a Ring camera is at its core not a security device, right? It just isn't. It's a camera with an internet connection. That's all it is. So you have to put some layer of security in between that device and, the malicious internet. Not even really IoT devices. If you think, a couple of years ago, the Office of Personnel Management, OPM data breach, where an OPM employee left a laptop full of basically all the government employees' personal information, right? So social security numbers, background check information, just a treasure trove of data. They took that home on a laptop, left it in their car. Someone broke into the car, stole the laptop, had all the data. Obviously, that's not what you want. But, we have solutions for that, right? You can encrypt data at rest, which would be a solution for that. But, if you're talking delivery drivers, for example, or, just truckers who are moving across the country, they have to protect those devices. There's trackers and inventory systems in those devices, and someone gains access to them, they could gain access to your network and then shut it down and hold you for ransom. So yeah, the threat surface is huge. That's why we call it the boundless, story, is we're protecting this new environment without a boundary is how we say it.
Well, goodness, you're scaring the crap out of me right now. On the employee training side, I would agree, and I'm not in the industry like you are, but on the employee training side, what are some examples that you've seen as some really good, what companies can do in terms of employee training to get them involved and understand that clicking on something might be a problem? I know a lot of people use their laptops that are company supplied, but they also use it as their home and personal email address book. And so how do you go about training the employees? Because seems like it's a big hole out there.
Right. I would say there are a bunch of reputable vendors who provide user training. The government uses some. Most larger corporations are using some kind of, dedicated user trainer. I think it's important to get repetitions in because, the malicious actors are constantly evolving, right, with their techniques and their procedures. And my partner who lives with me, she's actually a fraud investigator for a bank. So she faces a lot of the same things, right? Like an old lady gets called up, says, we need you to convert your social security check to Bitcoin because of whatever, right? And they just do it, right? And the bank is even required to provide some kind of education to their tellers to identify when an old lady comes in and asks for $10,000 in Bitcoin, tell them no, right? So, showing people what a phishing email looks like, telling them how to validate whether a link is actually the link you think it is, right? If someone asks you to send money to a new bank account, you should validate that bank account. It sounds easy, but people are doing it every day, right? They're making, inattentive mistakes, I'll say, especially if you get, thousands or hundreds of emails a day, you're likely to just click through things, and people just need to be a little more diligent. And I think, they need to understand the consequences also. So if you understood the consequence of clicking a link is going to ransomware your company, and maybe you're out of a job now, that's a big deal, right? Something to consider.
There's a lot of examples out there too of the emails that purport to be from like a boss or something at the company, and it's like a quick little message like, "Hey, could you give me the account number again?" or something like that. That's one that seems to be pretty common these days too.
Right. Yeah. And that's something where you need to tell your employees, hey, even now we have this kind of little joke thread going through our company where our CEO has been texting all of us asking for information. He absolutely hasn't, obviously.
Right.
But if you get something, does it make sense that the CEO texted me on my personal phone asking me for an account number? Does that make sense? Right? It probably doesn't. Right. So just reminders like that to people are very important.
Yeah. A lot of it's just take a beat, think about it. But a lot of times people, if they do see a message from the CEO or something, are not doing that. They're jumping at it because they want to, please the bosses.
Right. Yeah. And that's exactly why the malicious actors are doing it. They know human psychology. They know what you're likely to do. So it's very effective. I mean, it really is.
So what are some of the consequences that you see? I mean, you mentioned a couple of different attacks that are very, you mentioned the one that was very straightforward as the 2.5 million goes away and then the list of high rollers. What are some of the consequences for a business beyond just the immediate financial implications?
So obviously there's just loss of revenue because you can't do your job because your whole system is locked up. There's also reputational damage, right? So I don't know if you remember 2013, Target got hacked and 40 million credit cards went to the breeze, right? Out on the dark web. I'm sure people lost money and lost identities. And tomorrow or the next day, you might not be so inclined to swipe a credit card at Target, right? And Target's got a pretty good presence in the market, so they didn't take that big a hit. But imagine you're like a smaller organization or a smaller mom and pop shop, and everybody in the neighborhood learns that you just lost all the credit card numbers. Maybe you can't sustain that backlash like Target can, right? And in the end, Target ended up settling that for $18.5 million. So, if you're a small business doing $5 million a year in revenue, you probably can't absorb something like that, right? And in addition to reputational damage, you're looking at civil liability too, and not just in the United States. So Amazon, obviously a global company, was recently found guilty by the government of Belgium for violating GDPR regulations, which is a data privacy regulation the European Union has. And Belgium levied an $877 million penalty against Amazon. So again, if Amazon could probably handle $877 million was fine, but a smaller business, that's it for you, right? You're out of business. And then, Equifax a few years ago, they lost a bunch of personal financial information. They ended up paying a $575 million fine. So, not just lost revenue, but if you're found to be liable, if you're found to not have done your due diligence with cybersecurity, you can be held civilly liable for those breaches as well.
In the freight and logistics world, there's a ton of really small and medium-sized companies that probably don't focus that much effort on cybersecurity because they say, what the heck? I'm only a company of about 10 or 15, or I just have, a couple trucks and I'm running around. But what are the threats and implications to them? Should they be afraid? What would be your counsel to them?
Yeah, so they absolutely should be afraid. I would say afraid. Basically, you should be
after I said it, I said, "Why did I
live in fear?
Why did I pick that phrase?" But yes, go ahead.
They should be diligent, and it is true. A small to medium-sized business is just, you're not going to be focused on cybersecurity. So let's say you are let's say you just own a warehouse in Indiana. You have 10 employees, right? You've got the owner, maybe the owner's wife and son. You've got a couple forklift drivers. And maybe an accountant. None of you are cybersecurity experts, right? So again, you don't know what you don't know. But if you're doing a little bit of research, you're going to find that you need to protect yourself a little bit, right? And a small business like that isn't necessarily going to be the target of a cybersecurity attack. Like Amazon, they're targets all the time because there's money in Amazon, right? The attacks happen where there's money. If you're a small mom and pop warehouse, who's just kind of breaking even, nobody's going to target you for a cybersecurity attack, essentially. But there are a lot of actors doing what I call shotgun style attacks, where they're just throwing stuff out and see what sticks. An example is here, just in my lab, in my house, I have a remote access appliance. And if I look in the log, almost every day, there are spurious login attempts to that secure access device. And I have nothing behind my secure access appliance. It's just me and my family and my dogs in this house, right? What they're doing is my appliance is on a domain called vandelay.local. It's just a Vandelay Industries is a fictional business I've set up in my lab.
Seinfeld reference.
Right. And what they'll do is they'll try to log in as shipping at vandelay.local or finance at vandelay.local, which are not accounts that exist in my domain. But what they're just trying to do, they're just trying to log in with what would be a commonly used account, right? And then they use a bunch of, like password 123 or password 345, just, do a kind of a brute force attack to see if they can gain access to it. And again, there's nothing behind my appliance except my house, right? So they're not going to get anything out of this. But if you're a small business and you have, your remote access set up with shipping at, warehouse@indiana.com with a password of password 123, someone's going to get into it just because they're trying, right? Once they get into it, they're like, maybe I can make $500 out of this, right? Maybe I can ransomware this, this whole couple for maybe $1,000, which isn't zero, right?
Right.
Or if they lock you down, maybe you just go out of business because you don't have, again, that Amazon capital to sustain you. But really, yeah, so I would say lack of interest, what you kind of described, where, you just have 10 employees, you're not really interested, or maybe not interested, but again, you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't have a cybersecurity person focused on that. Lack of manpower is another thing, because if you want to hire a dedicated, network admin, then you're going to have to pay them, right? Or you might hire a very, very junior person to save money. But again, that person might not be as qualified to do that as you need. And lack of budget, right? I mean, we run into people all the time who are just kind of running on fumes on their subscriptions and their devices because of lack of budget, right? And that's a problem across every industry, right? Is where can I save a buck? And if there's a lot of people who think they can save a buck with cybersecurity, and you can, but you're going to be rolling the dice if you do.
Kind of bouncing off this in freight and logistics too, everyone is somewhat intertwined. So, the small mom and pop warehouse might work with the big railroad or the big carrier or a couple of other freight and logistics companies who are coordinating shipments and things like that. So what's the danger then across the supply chain with one of those areas being vulnerable?
And that's a great example is, for instance, with the fish tank thermometer, someone gained access to a fish tank thermometer and moved across the network into the high rollers database. So someone could gain access via the mom and pop shop and could very well move across the network into the rail yard system or the larger national distribution system. And large organizations certainly do implement requirements to connect to their networks, right? So the government certainly has that. Like you have to be FIPS compliant if you want to do business with the government at all, right? Even if you just make shoelaces for boots for the Army, right? If you want to receive payment from the government, all your stuff has to be what's called FIPS compliant. And a lot of companies, bigger companies certainly do have those requirements also. And a lot of our customers, they'll call us up saying, hey, I'm about to sign a big deal with this larger company, and I need to make sure your device does these things, right? Because that company has insisted that if you want to do business with us, you have to be a certain level of cyber compliance. So we do see that, out in the wild a lot. Obviously, some things don't go so well, but at least people are trying. So that's good to see.
So are there any examples you have specifically with freight and logistics? I mean, you mentioned Amazon has had some issues with different areas, but any other ones that you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, actually, I found one. I was kind of researching for this interview. There's a distributor called Expeditors International of Washington, which is a global logistics company. They were victims of a cyber attack back in 2022. It was undisclosed what it was, but they did put out a press release, and I took a couple excerpts from it, which I think are very telling and should really inform other logistics people in the future. One of the lines was, while our systems are shut down, we will have limited ability to conduct operations, including but not limited to arranging for shipments of freight or managing customs and distributions activities for our customer shipments, which seems like the bread and butter for a logistics company, right? So they can't basically ship freight, which is huge, right? And then later on, they say, we are incurring expenses related to the cyber attack to investigate and remediate this matter and expect to continue to incur expenses of this nature in the future. So, it says it right there. They were not able to conduct their business, which means they couldn't charge anyone to do that. And then they were incurring expenses on top of that to remediate the cyber attack. So, again, this is a global company. This could have happened anywhere, right? They have presences in Europe and Asia and everywhere. So this could have been a device or an office that was compromised in China or in Australia, right? And that person was able to shut down the entire system of this global logistics company.
I'm pretty familiar with that one. And we have seen even some of our carrier partners that we have out there over the past 3 years where they've gotten shut down. Some of them are larger, which it's a little bit easier for them to maneuver because they do have the talent in-house to do it. But we've also witnessed some other ones that are a bit smaller, and logistics is not a big margin business, and it's a cash flow business, and it really damages their operations and takes them quite a long time to actually recover. Even I've got some examples that even some larger companies, it's taken them up to 6 months to get their invoicing correct so they can start collecting cash properly for all the business they have out there. So
right.
And we've even seen examples where we've had customers that have been shut down for about a week because of ransomware. Now, it's tough to get an email in and out of them anymore, but they figured out how to do it, or they feel like they've got themselves well protected. But it's something that I think all of us deal with in some form or fashion, whether it's ourselves or companies we work with.
Think of even this, if you're talking about like a larger distributor or someone who's like really integral in the supply chain. If you remember what happened with the Colonial Pipeline, I think 2 or 3 years ago, where they are ransomwared, and the next day, no gas stations had gas, right? Yeah. That is a huge implication for one ransomware attack. If you were able to ransomware a large logistics distributor in like the Port of Los Angeles, you could shut down shipping for weeks in the United States, right? And that would have huge implications across the country for the economy and for everything. So it's very important.
The 6-month thing that Rick mentioned too, as far as going back to like the small or medium-sized businesses, isn't there a number relating to that? How long they survive after a cyber attack?
Yeah, I don't know that number, but it would depend, right? So you're talking about small margin businesses, and Expeditors International might be able to absorb a week or two of not doing business, right? But a small mom and pop warehouse probably can't, and it might just put you out of business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Moving on to the cyber threat report. So SonicWall puts out a cyber threat report every year, and then they do a mid-year update, which just came out fairly recently. We mentioned with freight and logistics, people are spread out all over the country. There's a particular piece in there about malware spread. So first off, can you give us a little bit of an overview of what types of malware there are out there, and then what does it say for some of the places, the states that are most affected by malware right now?
Right. So malware is just kind of a broad term to describe really any malicious attack against a computer network, right? That could be viruses, it could be Trojans, it could be something like a keylogger that's stealing passwords, it could be something that's just sitting on a computer monitoring your traffic, it can be anything, right? there's a whole list of what different types of malware. But the reason you'll see different states come up on the cyber threat report is malware is somewhat cyclical. So again, cyber attackers go where the money is, right? So if you imagine the United States, the money is really centralized in a few places. You've got like, the Northeast, you've got the DC area, you've got, maybe Southern California are big spots they would hit. And after those spots, those companies get hit enough, they start to harden their networks, right? And those industries start to hear about attacks. Those industry colleagues and competitors start to harden their networks. Like when Target got hit, I'm sure Walmart went the next day and was like, okay, we don't need that. What are we doing to prevent that? So once those regions get hardened, it's like you have a fence around your house and your neighbor doesn't, right? So the burglar is going to go to the house without a fence. So once they start, not being able to get in the DC stuff anymore, they move out to, Virginia. They move out to wherever the next kind of business location is that's soft. So that's why you kind of see geographically these things move around. Also, there's a lot of population migration in the United States right now. So I know an example in my region, Smith & Wesson headquarters, used to be in Massachusetts that moved to Tennessee this month. So, that's a business moving out of a high threat attack area, which is kind of the Northeast, to Tennessee, which is not a high threat area. You got to think Tesla moved out of California to Texas. So now it's a huge target that's moved to a new geographic location. And there's, business moving all over the place for a number of reasons. And that's another reason you're going to see, those kind of threat heat map, spots around the country move, is because businesses are moving, the money is moving. So that's where people are going to launch those attacks. And
also in the report, it kind of tracks the prevalence of ransomware. Right now, it actually looks like overall, it's not at its peak in terms of a threat right now. But as you said, it's you've outlined a number of different scenarios. It seems like ransomware is still maybe the biggest one for businesses to watch out for.
Right. So ransomware is really the largest disruptor to businesses because, again, it disallows you from using your own resources, right? A virus might affect a single device. It might affect a single service, but ransomware takes it all away. It says you can't use it. You can't use your own databases. And that's kind of been escalated by something we call ransomware as a service now, where you don't have to be, a sophisticated threat actor to launch a ransomware attack. The sophisticated threat actors are now offering ransomware attacks to, much less qualified individuals. So you can go to places on the internet and you can basically buy a ransomware package and then just send out a bunch of emails. And if you get a click, that ransomware package activates, you get the benefits. So no longer do you have to be, again, a sophisticated threat actor. You can be just someone who wants to steal money, and you buy this ransomware package, you launch it, you get the benefits. Another threat that's kind of specific to really companies that have a lot of personal data. So like anyone who has a lot of credit card numbers or financial information or healthcare information is what we call a triple threat ransomware. So we'll go like single, double, triple. A single threat ransomware has encrypted your stuff. You can't use it anymore until you pay me, right? Then they started getting more sophisticated. And before they encrypted your data, they would exfiltrate it. And they would say, you have to pay me to use your data. And then you also have to pay me to not release it, because now they have it, right? They have all the, credit card numbers. They have all the patient records of a hospital. And they're saying, you're going to pay me to get your files unencrypted, and you're also going to pay me or else I'm going to just release it anyways. And then the triple threat is after they've exploited the company to unencrypt their own data and then exploited them to not release it, they'll contact the individual persons that are affected. So if it's a healthcare breach, they'll contact all the patients and say, we have your patient record, pay us $500 or we'll release it, right? Yeah. So now if you got a call from a ransomware actor that said, we have your record from, X hospital and you have to pay us $500 to release it, you're not likely to probably go back to the hospital again, right? Or back to that vendor who lost your credit card number and cost you $500 to not release it. So that's very disruptive, right? Not only to a company to get your data back, but now they're affecting your customer base, right?
So we've been walking and talking a lot of these different threats out there. What can businesses do? You had mentioned hardware, software, some of the stuff out there. I've even heard that AI is starting to jump into the security area. And a lot of people, I think, believe that, well, if they have it in the cloud, they don't have a server sitting in their office, that they don't really have anything to worry about. So what are some of the things that people can do about the threats that we've been discussing here?
Right. So, you have to view it in a different way these days. And, the easiest way for me to say it is to go boundless, right? That's our moniker for sure, is that, unless you're in a very small operation with a very small, physical presence, you likely have threat surface everywhere, right? Or at least, not secured in your office. So you really have to consider not only your resources on premise, but also in the cloud. Anything you're subscribing to, like web applications you might be using, are also a place you could, lose data. If you have a remote workforce, you have to protect them as well, at home and at the office. You have to hire qualified admins. And even if you can only get maybe a junior person to work for you, you might want to, maybe do some outside consulting 2 or 3 times a year to kind of validate that your security posture is good, right? It's always good. Even if you have a very competent admin staff, it's always good to get a penetration test or some kind of security evaluation to make sure you're up to date with the most current threats, because nobody can know everything, right? It's always good to get a second or third opinion on what you're doing. And again, of course, educate employees, in a logistics context, make sure your drivers aren't leaving their iPads, sitting out on a dock. That's very important. Make sure people aren't clicking links. Make sure you're not sending money to people who aren't validated. I'd say those are kind of the big 3 is, make sure you're covering your entire threat surface, hire qualified admins or contract out for second or third party evaluation, and then make sure your employees are educated.
As far as the employee education, as you said, that's something that is not a one-time deal either.
Right. Yeah. Because it's constantly evolving. It's something that the threat actors every day, they're recalibrating their attacks to get around, basically our informational campaigns, right? So we can say, hey, there's an Apple scheme that's going on right now. So nobody clicks on Apple links anymore. But now, okay, it's an Amazon scheme. It's the same scheme. It's just a different look, right? So yeah, it's a continuous process. And a lot of people are doing yearly cybersecurity training, which is, it's not bad, but I would say a little more often is good. I know it's arduous and people don't like to do it, but it's certainly better doing a 15-minute refresher every quarter than costing your company $2.5 million, right? I would say.
Yeah, and having an employee click on a bad phishing email that's actually just a drill rather than the real thing.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's the insider threat is the biggest concern because there's really no way to protect against it, right? I can sell you products all day long, and you can get a good admin that can configure them perfectly, but if someone wires the money out, that's nothing you can do about that.
Well, Jeremiah, thanks very much for joining us. How can people learn more about SonicWall?
You can obviously go to our website, SonicWall.com. You can get a lot of our literature and data sheets, whatnot, and find out about our products and offerings. I would say it's probably the easiest way. And if you're looking for our products, you can get in touch with a sales rep via our website, and they'll call you back within probably 24 to 48 hours and go in an in-depth discussion. They'll get someone on the phone like me where you can talk, nuts and bolts and ones and zeros about what your environment looks like and how we can help you. So obviously start at the website, get in touch with someone, and you might be in touch with me within 2 or 3 days.
Great. Well, Jeremiah, thanks again very much for joining us.
Yes, we appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and I hope this helps people out.
Thanks for joining us for InTek Freight and Logistics, the podcast. And thanks very much to Jeremiah Vanderneut for taking the time to speak with us. Check out the links in the description to learn more about everything we discussed. Subscribe or follow now to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available. And you can help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen. If you have questions, email us at podcast@intechlogistics.com and visit intechfreight-logistics.com for more about what we do. For Rick Lagore, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll talk to you next time.